I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to cheat on her husband, but if you'd lived my life, if you understood what I went through every single day, you wouldn't judge me. You might even sympathize. Maybe you'd see that I had no other choice. Ryan used to be different. When we first got married, he was kind, ambitious, and above all generous. He understood that my family wasn't well off, that my mother had struggled ever since my dad left, and that my younger brother Ethan wasn't exactly responsible when it came to money. He never hesitated to help. In the beginning, he wanted to. I remember how he'd reassure me, rubbing my back when I stressed about bills, saying things like, "Laura, we're family now. What's yours is mine." That man is long gone. Somewhere along the way, Ryan changed. His patience wore thin. His kindness shriveled up, and suddenly, he started keeping track of everything. Every dollar, every favor, every time he had to step in and help my mother or Ethan. He started calling it his money, as if we weren't husband and wife, as if we weren't supposed to be a team. I tried to make him see reason, to remind him that helping family isn't a burden. It's a duty. But instead of listening, he hardened. The man who once promised to take care of me, of us, became someone I barely recognized. It all came to a head when my mother asked for help with her mortgage again. She'd been struggling ever since Dad left her with nothing, and Ryan knew that. He knew how much she depended on us. But when I brought it up, his face went cold. "No," he said simply. I was stunned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Laura. I'm not paying her mortgage again." I stared at him, waiting for him to explain, to tell me he was joking. But he just kept eating his dinner like he hadn't just slammed the door on my mother's future. "Ryan, she's going to lose her house. She should have thought about that before she took those trips last year. She's not my responsibility, Laura." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wasn't even sorry. There was no regret, no second-guessing, just pure selfish refusal. "She's my mother," I hissed, trying to keep my voice down. "And that makes her your family too." Ryan just shook his head. "I've done enough." Enough. That word made my skin crawl. How could he say that? How could he act like there was some invisible limit on how much we were supposed to care for the people we love? It was like he wanted my mother to fail. Like he enjoyed watching us struggle. That night, I slept in the guest room, too furious to even look at him. He didn't come after me. He didn't apologize. He just let me go like my feelings didn't matter. And that's when I realized something. Ryan had stopped loving me. He had stopped caring about my happiness, about my family, about us. He was done, even if he hadn't admitted it yet. And maybe I was done too. I don't know if that's what pushed me toward Nathan, or if this was always inevitable. Maybe I just needed someone to remind me that I mattered, that I wasn't just some burden like Ryan made me feel. Nathan had been in my life for years, but I'd never looked at him that way before. He was my boss, a wealthy real estate developer, charming, powerful, and always in control. He was everything Ryan used to be, before he decided that money mattered more than me. Started with little things. A hand on my lower back when he guided me into a meeting. A lingering glance when he thought I wasn't looking. Compliments, ones that felt earned, not just thrown out carelessly like Ryan's used to be. And then one night, after I had yet another argument with Ryan about money, about my family, Nathan found me sitting in my car, tears still wet on my cheeks. "Rough night?" he asked, leaning against the driver's side door. I nodded, too exhausted to pretend I was fine. He exhaled slowly, then said, "You deserve better than this." And maybe he was right. Maybe I did. I didn't kiss him that night. I didn't even let myself think about it. But something shifted inside me. A door cracked open just a little. And I didn't try to close it. I should have. I know that. But I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to freedom. I told myself it was harmless. That I wasn't doing anything wrong. That it was just talking. But deep down I knew better. The way I smiled when Nathan texted me. The way I lingered at the office after hours, waiting for a reason to be alone with him. The way my heart raced when he complimented me. When his hand brushed mine. When his voice dropped just a little lower than necessary. Felt good. Felt right. With Nathan, I wasn't the nagging wife begging for scraps of affection. I wasn't the ungrateful woman demanding too much. I was wanted. I was seen. Ryan barely even looked at me anymore. Our nights were cold, filled with silence or arguments about money, about my family, about how I always expected too much. And maybe I did. But was it really too much to want a husband who still adored me? Who still put me first? He used to. Back when we were young and stupid and thought love was enough to carry us through anything. But love wasn't enough. Not when resentment built up like poison in our marriage. Not when he made me feel like a beggar every time I asked for help from my mother, for Ethan, for anyone who wasn't himself. I'm not an ATM, Laura. He had said that to me like I was just using him. Like the years I spent by his side meant nothing. Like I hadn't given to him in ways that money could never measure. I tried to explain it to Nathan once why I felt the way I did, why I was drowning in frustration and loneliness. He listened, really listened, his eyes locked on mine as if he could see every wound I'd been hiding. You deserve more, he murmured, fingers tracing slow, lazy circles against my wrist. You shouldn't have to beg for what's yours. That was the night everything changed. The night I let him pull me into his arms. The night I stopped pretending I could resist him. The guilt came later. It always did. In the mornings when I woke up next to Ryan, his back turned to me. His body so far away that we might as well have been strangers. That was when the shame crept in, slithering through my thoughts, whispering that I was destroying everything we had built. But then I would remember the way Nathan looked at me. The way he touched me. The way he made me feel like I wasn't a burden, like I wasn't something to be tolerated. And suddenly the guilt didn't seem so unbearable. Ryan didn't notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. He barely asked me anything anymore, barely paid attention to the shifts in my mood, in my schedule. It was like he had already checked out of our marriage, like he had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. And if that was the case, why should I feel guilty? Why should I be the one suffering in silence while he lived his life without a care? But then something happened that I wasn't prepared for. My mother called me in a panic, her voice shaking through the phone. Laura, the bank sent me a final notice. They're going to foreclose if I don't make a payment by next week. My stomach dropped. Mom, I told you I tried. But Ryan? I don't care about Ryan, she snapped, something desperate in her tone. I need your help. You need to fix this. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. If Ryan wouldn't help, I had to find another way. And in that moment I knew exactly who to turn to. Nathan. I told myself it was just for my mother, just this once, just a loan to keep her afloat until she could figure things out. But deep down I knew the truth. This was the beginning of something else. Something far more dangerous. And there was no turning back now. I hesitated before calling Nathan, but only for a moment. The second I heard my mother's voice trembling with fear, any doubts I had disappeared. Ryan had left me no choice. If he wasn't going to step up, then I would find someone who would. Someone who actually cared. Nathan answered on the second ring. His voice warm, familiar, comforting. Laura, to what do I owe the pleasure? I closed my eyes, steadying myself. I need a favor. There was a pause, then a slow, knowing chuckle. Anything. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Because we both knew this wasn't just a simple request. This wasn't just about money. It's my mom, I continued, forcing myself to focus. She's about to lose her house. I've tried everything, but... I stopped myself before I could say but Ryan won't help, because I knew how Nathan would react. He already thought Ryan was beneath me. He had said as much before, in quiet moments when his lips were against my skin, when he whispered things I shouldn't have let myself believe. How much? Nathan asked, his voice smooth, controlled. 20,000. I felt sick saying it out loud, but there it was. A number so large it made my head spin, but to Nathan, that was nothing. He exhaled softly, and I could almost see his smirk through the phone. That's all? Laura. You know I'd give you whatever you needed. My breath caught. I don't want. I know, he interrupted gently. You're not asking for yourself. You're doing this for her. His voice dipped lower. That's what I love about you. You take care of the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. My throat tightened. He was talking about Ryan, even if he didn't say his name. And maybe he was right. Maybe Ryan didn't deserve me. Let me help you, Nathan murmured. Come see me tonight. We'll talk. I knew what that meant. I knew what I was walking into. And yet, I didn't hesitate. When I arrived at Nathan's penthouse later that evening, he was already waiting with a glass of wine in hand, his suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. You're tense, he observed, handing me the glass. You don't have to be. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through me, trying to quiet the voice in my head screaming that this was a mistake, that taking his money meant crossing a line I could never uncross. But when Nathan reached into his desk, pulled out a check, and slid it across the table, the weight of my mother's situation crushed any guilt I had left. Take it, he said simply. It's yours. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Nathan, I don't know how to. Sure. He stepped closer, his fingers tilting my chin up. You don't owe me anything, Laura. But the way he looked at me, the way his eyes darkened as they flickered to my lips, told me that wasn't entirely true. I didn't stop him when he leaned in. I didn't pull away when his mouth met mine. And when his hand skimmed over my body, pulling me into something I shouldn't have wanted, I let him. Because for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt something. And I didn't want to let it go. When I got home that night, Ryan was in his office, hunched over his laptop, completely unaware that his wife had just sold a part of herself to another man. I stood in the doorway watching him, waiting for even the slightest flicker of concern. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of his work, the same damn indifference I had grown used to. I swallowed the guilt creeping up my throat, shoving it deep, deep down. What Ryan didn't know wouldn't hurt him. And besides, I told myself as I gripped the check in my hand, he left me no choice. That I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the check Nathan gave me burning a hole in my nightstand drawer. My body still tingled from his touch, my skin humming with the memory of his lips, his hands, the way he made me feel. But the moment I stepped back into this house, back into Ryan's house, the guilt started creeping in. Not because I regretted what I did, but because I knew I should regret it. I turned to my side, looking at Ryan's back, the same position he always slept in. His body as far away from me as possible. He hadn't even noticed I came home late. He hadn't asked me where I was, hadn't even looked at me when I walked through the door. He didn't care. He never cared. And that's how I justified it. The next morning, I left early under the guise of running errands, stopping by my mother's house before I could second-guess myself. She answered the door with tired eyes, dark circles beneath them, her shoulders tense with worry. Mom, I said, swallowing hard. I got the money. She exhaled sharply, relief flooding her face as she pulled me into a tight embrace. Oh, Laura. I knew you'd come through. Thank you, baby. I should have felt good about it. I should have felt like I did the right thing. But her gratitude twisted something inside me because I knew the truth. This money wasn't mine. I wasn't some hero swooping in to save her. I owed Nathan now, even if he never said it outright. And that terrified me. She pulled away, eyes filled with concern as she cupped my face. Ryan finally agreed to help? I hesitated. Lied. Yeah. Humph. She scoffed, shaking her head. Took him long enough. I forced a smile, not wanting to linger on the reality of what I had done. I handed her the check, ignoring the way my hands trembled. Take this to the bank today, okay? Get ahead of it before they start the foreclosure process. Of course, she nodded, clutching the check like it was a lifeline. I don't know what I'd do without you, Laura. A lump formed in my throat, but I just nodded. Yeah, me neither. That afternoon, Ryan called me while I was at work, his tone casual, like nothing was wrong. Like our marriage wasn't crumbling. Your mom get everything handled? My stomach clenched. He had no idea. Yeah, she's okay now. Good, he said, sounding distracted. Because I need to talk to you about something. My pulse spiked. Did he know? Had he found out? What is it? I made an investment, he said, like it was nothing, like it was just another day in his life where he got to make all the decisions. It's gonna take up some of our savings, but it's a smart move long term. My jaw tightened. Our savings. Like it was his money, like he got to decide what mattered, what was important, while I had to beg for scraps just to keep my mother in her home. How much? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. 30,000. The air left my lungs. 30,000. More than what my mother needed. More than what he refused to give. Rage bubbled up inside me, white hot and blinding. And you didn't think to talk to me first? He sighed like I was bothering him. Laura, I am talking to you. No, you're informing me, I snapped. There's a difference. Jesus, why are you making this a fight? he muttered, clearly irritated. I didn't ask for permission because I shouldn't have to. This is a good investment, something that benefits us. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. What a joke. You know what? I said, my voice shaking. Do whatever you want, Ryan. You always do. I hung up before he could respond, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. And that's when I knew I didn't feel guilty anymore. Not even a little bit. That was the moment something in me snapped. Any lingering guilt I had about Nathan, about the money, about what I was doing, it vanished. Ryan had $30,000 to throw at some investment, but when my mother was drowning, when I was begging for his help, suddenly we couldn't afford it? Suddenly money mattered? No. I refused to feel bad. I refused to believe I was the villain here. If anything, he was. And if that was the case, then why should I hold back anymore? That night, I didn't go home right after work. I went to Nathan's. I didn't text him first, didn't ask if he was free. I just showed up, my heart pounding, my anger still simmering beneath my skin. He answered the door almost immediately, looking surprised but pleased. Laura, he murmured, stepping aside to let me in. Didn't expect you tonight. I didn't expect to be here, I admitted, brushing past him, feeling the heat of his presence behind me as I walked inside. But here I am. He studied me for a moment, then smirked, closing the door. Something happened? I scoffed, shaking my head. Ryan. That was all I had to say. Nathan's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. He hated Ryan even though they'd never met. The way I spoke about my husband had given him every reason to despise him. And I didn't care. Maybe I even liked it. What did he do now? Nathan asked, crossing his arms, watching me intently. Nothing, I said bitterly. That's the problem. He does nothing for me, nothing for my family, but when it comes to himself, he takes whatever he wants. Nathan tilted his head, stepping closer. And what about you, Laura? What do you want? My breath caught, because I knew what he was really asking. And this time I didn't hesitate. I reached for him first, grabbed his shirt, pulled him to me. I didn't think. I didn't stop. I didn't care. Because for the first time in a long time, I was taking what I wanted. When I finally left his place, it was past midnight. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, my skin still warm, my heart still pounding. I should have felt guilty. I should have been panicked, disgusted with myself, ashamed. But all I felt was alive. I pulled into my driveway, my hands still shaking, my mind still reeling from everything I'd done. The house was dark except for the light coming from Ryan's office window. Of course, he was still working, still consumed by whatever mattered most to him. Money, his investments, anything but me. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, then walked inside like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't a completely different woman than I had been that morning. As I passed his office, I hesitated, peering inside. He was at his desk, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop, eyes scanning whatever spreadsheet or financial report had his attention. He didn't even look up. You're home late, he muttered absently. My stomach twisted, but I forced a smirk. Had some errands to run. He just grunted in response, already disinterested, already dismissing me. If he only knew. I turned away, heading upstairs, the ghost of Nathan's touch still lingering on my skin. And for the first time I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of getting caught. After that night I stopped pretending. I stopped feeling guilty. I stopped hesitating whenever Nathan called, whenever he texted, whenever he so much as hinted that he wanted to see me. And I wanted to see him too. More than I wanted to be home. More than I wanted to sit across from Ryan at dinner and listen to him talk about investments and budgets and all the ways we couldn't afford to help my family but could afford whatever he wanted. I started coming home later and later, making excuses that Ryan barely acknowledged. Work ran long. A friend needed me. I was running errands. He never questioned it. He never cared. One night I came home past midnight, still smelling like Nathan's cologne, my skin still tingling from the way he touched me, and Ryan didn't even look up from his laptop. He barely acknowledged me, just muttered a distracted "hey" as I passed his office. And that was when it truly sank in. He wasn't paying attention. He wasn't even looking. And if he wasn't looking, he wasn't going to see it coming. The next morning I stood in the kitchen sipping coffee, watching Ryan as he read through emails on his phone. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask where I'd been last night. Nothing. Just business as usual. Just another day of him making it so easy to betray him. You have plans this weekend? I asked casually, stirring my coffee. Yeah, he said without looking up. Meeting with some investors Saturday. Might have to travel next week. I fought back a smirk, forcing my face into something neutral. Sounds important. It is. That was it. That was all I got. I could have told him right there that I was seeing someone else, that I had been in another man's bed more times than I could count, that I didn't love him anymore. If I ever really had. And he wouldn't have noticed. He wouldn't have cared. Nathan was different. Nathan looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. He made me feel wanted, needed. He called me just to hear my voice, sent me flowers, left me messages that made my heart race. With Ryan I felt invisible. With Nathan I felt alive. That afternoon, Nathan took me to a restaurant downtown. One that overlooked the city, expensive and exclusive. I wore a dress he bought me, something short and elegant, something Ryan never would have noticed, never would have appreciated. You know, Nathan said as he ran his fingers over my wrist. I've been thinking. I tilted my head. About. You. He smirked. Us. My pulse quickened. And I don't think I like sharing you. His voice was low, deliberate, dangerous. Not with him. My stomach twisted, heat rushing through me. Nathan. Leave him. His grip tightened just slightly, his eyes dark, possessive. You don't belong with him. You know that. I swallowed hard, my mind racing, my heart pounding. It wasn't the first time the thought had crossed my mind, but hearing it from him, seeing the way he meant it, I wasn't prepared for that. It's not that simple, I murmured. Divorce is messy, he finished for me, raising an eyebrow. I can handle messy, Laura. I hesitated, staring at him, searching for any sign that he was just saying this, that he didn't mean it. But Nathan never said things he didn't mean. I want you, he continued, his voice softer now, more dangerous. Not in secret. Not in stolen moments. I want you with me. My head spun. My breath came too fast. Because this wasn't just a game anymore. This wasn't just an escape from my miserable, loveless marriage. This was real. And for the first time I realized something terrifying. I wanted it. I wanted to leave Ryan. And I wasn't sure if it was because I loved Nathan, or because I wanted to watch Ryan break that I couldn't stop thinking about it. Nathan's words, his confidence, the way he looked at me like he already knew I would say yes. Like it wasn't even a question. Leave him. The idea had been floating in my mind for weeks, but hearing it out loud, hearing someone else say it, want it, that made it real. I told myself I needed time to think, but the truth was I had already decided. I wasn't in love with Ryan. I wasn't happy with Ryan. And now for the first time I had an out. But I needed to be smart. I needed to be careful. Nathan wanted me to rip off the Band-Aid, to burn it all down and walk away, but that wasn't how this worked. If I wanted to win, I had to be strategic. And that started with making Ryan think he was the one letting go. I started planting seeds that night. Little things, comments about how distant we'd become, about how we weren't the same people we used to be. He barely responded, too focused on whatever business deal had his attention. I let my voice shake just enough to make it real, to make him believe it was getting to me. Maybe we should take a break, I said softly, sitting across from him at the dinner table, my fork idly pushing food around my plate. Ryan barely looked up. A break? Yeah. I sighed, forcing hesitation into my voice. I just feel like we're different. Like something's off. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. Laura, I don't have time for this right now. Exactly what I wanted him to say. You never have time for anything. I shot back, injecting just enough hurt into my voice. That's the problem. Jesus, Laura. He dropped his fork onto his plate, his patience running thin. Why are you doing this? Because I'm unhappy, Ryan. I snapped, making sure my voice cracked at the end, making sure I sounded just unsteady enough. And I don't think you even care. He opened his mouth, then closed it, staring at me like he wasn't sure if this was worth the effort. And that was the moment I knew. He wasn't going to fight for me. He was tired of this marriage too. He just didn't want to be the bad guy. Fine. I would make him let me go. The next few days I pulled away even more. I avoided him. I made myself small in our home, gave him space to feel the distance, to let the idea of separation settle in. And then I did something even bolder. I started leaving traces of Nathan. Just enough to plant suspicion. A faint scent of cologne that wasn't Ryan's. A misplaced receipt in my purse for a restaurant he'd never been to. A text from an unknown number that I forgot to delete. Subtle things. Careless things. Things I wanted him to notice. And then finally he did. "Who's Nathan?" His voice was cold when he asked, his eyes locked on my phone, my stomach twisting at the sight of the screen in his hand. The message I left there on purpose. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to look confused. "What? Nathan?" His jaw clenched. "Who is he?" I hesitated, then swallowed hard, letting my lips part slightly, as if I wanted to tell him but couldn't. As if I was hiding something. "Ryan. Don't," he snapped, his voice sharp, his patience cracking. "Don't lie to me." I shook my head, as if I was trying to hold back the truth. As if I was barely keeping it together. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I whispered. His entire body tensed, his fingers tightening around my phone. "So it's true." I closed my eyes like I couldn't bear to look at him. I didn't say yes. I didn't have to. "Get out," he said after a long pause, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. My eyes snapped open. "What?" "I said get out," he repeated, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't want to be here? Then leave." My chest ached, not with regret but with victory. I won. He thought this was his decision. He thought he was the one ending it. He had no idea I had been leading him to this moment. And now I was freed. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle between us. Get out. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even betrayal. It was resignation. He was done. I had broken him down piece by piece, whisper by whisper, lie by lie, until he finally convinced himself that he was the one letting go. And now all I had to do was walk away. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to make sure this ended my way. "Ryan," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to sound devastated. "Please, I didn't mean for this to happen." His jaw clenched, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "Don't," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't stand there and act like this wasn't a choice. You chose this." He wasn't wrong. But he would never know just how calculated that choice had been. "I tried," I choked out, stepping closer, reaching for him, watching as he recoiled from my touch. "Good. Let the disgust fester. Let him push me away. I tried so hard to make this work, Ryan." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to stand there and pretend you tried while you were." He cut himself off, shaking his head like he couldn't even bring himself to say it out loud. "Who is he?" His voice dropped lower, almost dangerous. "How long has this been going on?" I hesitated, just enough to let the silence stretch, to make it seem like I was debating telling him the truth. "A few months," I whispered. His entire body tensed, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. "A few months," he repeated, almost to himself, like he was testing the words, feeling the shape of them, trying to understand how long he had been made a fool. "Did you ever love me?" The question caught me off guard. It shouldn't have. But it did. Because for a split second I almost answered honestly. I almost told him that I had loved him once a long time ago, back when he was the man who looked at me like I was his entire world. But that man was gone. And the one standing in front of me? He was nothing to me now. "I don't know," I said instead, watching as something in his eyes broke. "I don't know when things changed, Ryan. I just know that we aren't the same anymore." His lips parted slightly like he wanted to argue, to fight, but there was nothing left to fight for. I had made sure of that. "Get out," he said again, his voice quieter this time, weaker. Defeated. I nodded, lowering my head, making it look like I was barely holding myself together. Like this wasn't exactly what I wanted. I turned away, walking toward the stairs, leaving him standing there, drowning in his own misery. I packed a bag, moving slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This was it. The end of our marriage. The end of the life I had built with him. But it wasn't my ending. It was his. He thought he was taking control, but he had played right into my hands. I walked out the door without looking back, gripping my bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. Nathan was waiting for me outside, leaning against his car, a smirk tugging at his lips as he pushed off the door and opened it for me. I take it he didn't take it well? He told me to leave, I murmured, slipping inside, exhaling as the door shut behind me, as if closing it severed the last remaining thread tying me to my old life. Nathan slid in beside me, his fingers brushing my thigh, his touch electric, possessive. Good, he said simply. You're mine now. A shiver ran down my spine. Not from fear. From excitement. From freedom. I had gotten everything I wanted. Or so I thought. Because 2 days later, everything came crashing down. Started with a phone call. A blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Something warned me. Hello. There was silence on the other end. Then finally a voice. Cold. Sharp. Familiar. You really thought it would be that easy? My stomach dropped. Ryan. Shut up, he snapped, his voice cutting through me like a blade. I gave you what you wanted. I let you walk away. But you should have been smarter, Laura. You should have known I wouldn't let you get away with this. My pulse pounded in my ears. What are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough, he said darkly. Then the line went dead. My hands were shaking when I lowered the phone. Nathan noticed immediately. What's wrong? I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Ryan. Nathan's expression darkened. What did he say? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But it wasn't good. And for the first time since this all started, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Feared that I stared at my phone, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Ryan had never spoken to me like that before. Never with that kind of cold, measured hatred. He had always been passive, indifferent, uninterested in fights unless I forced them. But this was something else. This was a man who had been pushed too far. Laura, Nathan said, his voice sharper now. What did he say exactly? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to think. He said I should have been smarter. That I should have known he wouldn't let me get away with this. Nathan's eyes narrowed. He's bluffing. He didn't sound like he was bluffing. I whispered, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. He knows something, Nathan. So what? Nathan scoffed, leaning back against the couch, running a hand through his hair. What's he gonna do? Throw a tantrum? He already kicked you out. What else is left? I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But something about the way Ryan had spoken, the ice in his voice, the certainty. It felt like he was holding something over me. Something I wasn't prepared for. And then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I did fall apart, my phone dinged again. Another message. But this time it wasn't from Ryan. It was an email. From an anonymous sender. No subject. No text. Just one single attachment. My hands trembled as I opened it. And then the world stopped. Photos. Dozens of them. Of me and Nathan. Meeting at hotels. At restaurants. In his car. His hand on my thigh. My lips on his neck. One of them was from 2 nights ago. The night I left Ryan, when I climbed into Nathan's car and let him drive me away. My entire body went cold. Nathan? I choked out, turning the phone toward him. His face darkened as he scrolled through the pictures, his jaw tightening, his entire body going still. Son of a... He exhaled sharply, tossing the phone onto the table like it burned him. How the hell did he get these? I don't know. I whispered, my stomach twisting. But he's had them for a while. Some of these are old, Nathan. Nathan clenched his fists. That son of a bitch had us followed. My mouth was dry. Why didn't he say anything before? Because he was waiting. Nathan muttered, his eyes sharp, calculating. He wanted you to think you won. He wanted you to think you chose this, that he was letting you walk away. A bitter laugh escaped him. And now? He's showing you that he was in control the whole time. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe, like the air was too thick, too heavy. Ryan had been watching me. For months. He had known about Nathan. He had known I was cheating. And instead of confronting me, instead of fighting for me, he had just waited. He let me walk into his trap with my eyes wide open. And now I had no idea what he was going to do next. Laura, Nathan said suddenly, his voice lower now, more controlled. Listen to me. He's not going to do anything. I snapped my head up. How can you be so sure? Because men like Ryan? Nathan smirked, but there was no humor in it. They don't fight for things. They don't confront. They plot. They manipulate. They play the long game. He leaned in, resting his elbows on his knees. He's trying to scare you. That's it. I wasn't convinced. And if he's not just trying to scare me? Nathan sighed, running a hand down his face. Then we get ahead of him. How? Simple, he said, shrugging. We control the narrative. You go to him first. You apologize, you act ashamed. You let him think he still has the upper hand. My stomach turned. You want me to beg? I want you to play the game, Nathan corrected, his eyes locked on mine. If you don't, he's going to drag you through hell. This way. You contain the damage. I hated that he was right. I hated that I had to think like this. But Ryan knew. He had proof. He could take this to court. He could destroy me in the divorce. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Fine, I murmured. I'll talk to him. Nathan nodded. Good. And Laura. He reached out, cupping my chin, tilting my face toward him. Don't forget, you're mine now. Not his. No matter what happens next. His words sent a shiver down my spine. Because the truth was, I wasn't so sure anymore. I left Nathan's place and drove to Ryan's house, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had no plan. No script. Just one goal: damage control. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I hesitated before stepping out, my pulse pounding in my ears. Ryan had to be awake. He wanted me to come crawling back. I walked up the steps, inhaled sharply, and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily in my hand. The door was unlocked. My pulse spiked. I stepped inside, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The house was silent. Too silent. Ryan. My voice echoed through the darkness. No answer. My gut screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. Not until I knew what the hell was going on. I moved cautiously through the hallway, flicking on lights as I went. The living room was empty. The kitchen was spotless. The office, I stopped. The door was open, just a crack. A faint glow coming from inside. I pushed it open slowly. And then my heart stopped. Ryan was sitting at his desk, his laptop open, his phone on the table beside him. But he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking right at me. Took you long enough, he said, his voice eerily calm. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed. Ryan, save it. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. You're not here to apologize. You're here because you're scared. My throat tightened. What do you want? What do I want? He chuckled darkly. That's the wrong question, Laura. You should be asking, what am I going to do? A chill ran down my spine. Ryan. You humiliated me. His voice was cold now. Deadly. You lied to me. You made me feel like a fool. And you thought I'd just let it go. My mouth went dry. Shut up. He stood, his eyes locked onto mine. You think you're clever, don't you? You think you won. He took a step closer and I instinctively stepped back. You have no idea what's coming. My heart slammed against my ribs. What are you going to do? A slow, cruel smile curved his lips. Watch. Then he grabbed his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward me. A video. My stomach dropped. It was me. And Nathan. In bed. Together. My blood ran cold. You should have been smarter, Laura, Ryan murmured, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Now? You belong to me. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen, at the unmistakable image of me and Nathan tangled together in his bed. The sheets. My bare shoulders. His hands gripping my waist. The timestamp in the corner mocking me, proving just how deep I was in this. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. Ryan had everything. He could ruin me with a single tap of his finger. Where did you get that? My voice barely sounded like my own. He smirked, slow and cruel, and slipped his phone back into his pocket. Does it matter? I clenched my hands into fists, fighting to stay calm, fighting to think. Ryan, please. Oh, now it's Ryan, please. He laughed, shaking his head. Where was that when you were spreading your legs for him? His words hit like a slap, but I forced myself not to react, not to give him the satisfaction. You don't have to do this, I said, voice low, careful, controlled. You don't have to. Don't have to. He cut me off, stepping closer, his eyes dark, unreadable. Laura, you don't get it, do you? You already lost. You lost the second you thought I was too blind, too stupid, to see what was right in front of me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I had underestimated him. I thought he was the same detached, indifferent man I had spent years resenting. I thought he'd let me walk away. I thought he'd let me win. But Ryan had been playing a longer game than I ever realized. He had let me dig my own grave step by step, lie by lie, until I had nowhere left to run. I inhaled shakily, forcing my hands to unclench, forcing my body to relax. I had one shot at this. One way to turn it around. What do you want? I whispered. His smirk widened, and something about it made my skin crawl. Ah, there it is. The right question. He circled me slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house, taking his time like he was savoring this, like he had waited months for this moment. You see, Laura, I could destroy you right now. His voice was almost casual, like we were discussing the weather. I could send that video to your job, to your friends, to your mother. My stomach turned violently. Ryan, I could drag you through court, take everything in the divorce, prove adultery, have Nathan subpoenaed. Make sure you walk away with nothing. I swallowed hard, my head spinning, my lungs struggling to pull in air. You don't want a divorce? He stopped in front of me, tilting his head like he was considering it. Oh, I do, he said smoothly. But not yet. I frowned, my brain trying to keep up, trying to connect the dots. What do you mean? He exhaled, looking almost amused. You've been playing this game like a child, Laura, thinking you could just move on to the next best thing, thinking I'd just let you go. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. But you're still my wife. His words sent ice through my veins. He wasn't letting me go. Not yet. You want to leave? You want to play house with your rich boyfriend? Fine. He stepped back, his expression turning almost businesslike. But you're not getting a dime. And you will keep up appearances until I say otherwise. My stomach dropped. You want me to stay married to you? Legally? Yes. His smirk returned. Publicly? Yes. And in return, I won't ruin you. I won't tell your mother how her precious daughter whored herself out for a few handouts. I won't send your boss a nice little email with proof that you've been screwing a client. My breath hitched, horror slamming into me. Nathan isn't my client. No, but he's an investor. That's enough. I wonder what your company's policy is on ethics violations. My blood ran cold. He had thought of everything. Why are you doing this? I whispered. Because I can. He shrugged. Because I win. He watched me closely, waiting for me to argue, to fight, to beg. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because I knew there was no way out of this. Ryan had trapped me. I thought I had control. I thought I was playing him. But in the end, I had played right into his hands. How long? I asked, finally, my voice hollow. He smiled, slow and satisfied. As long as it takes. I stared at him, my mind racing, my body frozen, knowing that whatever came next, whatever nightmare he had planned, I deserved it.